Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar about the Stanford Biodesign Innovation Fellowship. My name is Emily Johnson, and I'm the Fellowships Manager. We're so happy that you're joining us today. It's a beautiful afternoon in Northern California, and we're excited to have you all here. Just to note, we are using a brand new webinar technology, so please bear with us if there are any glitches. We hope it runs as smoothly as possible. We'll wait just a minute for everyone to jump on so everyone gets a chance. Again, welcome. Glad that you're here. We have almost 200 participants, so thanks for joining us. I'm here today with our fellowship director, Dr. Todd Brinton. Dr. Brinton is a practicing interventional cardiologist and our fellowship director. He will first give a presentation on the fellowship and sort of the yearly schedule that you will go through as a fellow. And then afterwards, we will open it up to a live Q&A. And please use the Q&A feature in the Zoom webinar and type in your questions, and we'll answer as many as we can. Also, this session is being recorded and will be put on our website as soon as we can get it up there. So welcome again. And I'll now give it over to Todd once we share the screen.
Perfect. Well, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are in the world. Wanted to give you just an overview of our fellowship program here at Stanford, the Innovation Fellowship Program, and thank Emily, who's our manager for our programs. The picture you see on this slide gives you an overview. This is the Clark Center, Jim Clark Center, that was actually is pivotal really in the cross-innovation on the Stanford campus. It sits between the School of Engineering, School of Business, and School of Medicine, which is where we are housed as the new center, as you know, it's the Stanford Biodesign Center for Biodesign. Again, highlighting that this is the Stanford campus. This is a beautiful campus in Northern California. We leverage much of what Stanford has to offer within the fellowship program. As you can see here, highlighted is the Clark Center where we are housed. This is in real close proximity to the School of Medicine and School of Engineering, and also sits very close to the old School of Business. The new School of Business has been set just slightly across campus next to the Stanford football stadium, where our leading Stanford football team actually practices and plays. Wanted to really give you an overview of our one-year fellowship, what we call the Process-Driven Health Technology Innovation, and contrast this with innovation overall, and we'll spend some time on that in just a second. We're going to tell you some of the features of how we structure the fellowship, and one of the most important is the fact that we put people into multidisciplinary teams, both by training discipline, but by experience and somewhat on style. We currently have 12 fellows in our Innovation Fellowship that are here for a year. Of note, we also have a Singapore-Stanford Biodesign program, which is set up as a joint venture between Stanford University and the government of Singapore, which has people here for 6 months. They'll be here between January and June, and then they'll return to work on their projects in Asia. The specific aims are to develop the next generation of leaders in health technology innovation, and most importantly, to teach a repeatable, need-driven methodology for innovation, and to teach business fundamentals for the implementation of these projects. So I'd like to give you a little bit of history on the program. The program was founded in 2000 by Paul Yock and Josh Mackauer. Paul, a very famous interventional cardiologist here at Stanford. Josh Mackauer, a very, very prolific inventor, innovator, who has both been a faculty member here at Stanford in the School of Medicine, but also has been involved in a number of technologies as founder and chairman to take these technologies into clinical practice. We had our first Biodesign Fellowship class in 2001. We started the 2008 India Biodesign program. That now program was a joint venture between the government of India and Stanford. That program has now gone on to be run exclusively by the Indian government. We founded the Singapore Stanford Biodesign program in 2010. We are still working with that program, and ultimately that program will go on to the government of Singapore. In 2014, we actually started a program called the Global Faculty Training Program. It's a joint venture with a number of different universities and governments to train faculty to develop programs in innovation worldwide. This is really the core faculty team. As I mentioned, Paul Yock, who's the director. In 2005, we merged the Surgical Innovation Program and the Biodesign Program together. Tom Crummell, who directed that program, now co-directs the Biodesign Program with Paul Yock. Gordon Salas is our executive director. Down on the lower right, Carolyn Heller is our director of operations and finance. Lynn Denon is our director of academic programs. And I've run now the fellowship. This will be the 12th year for the fellowship program. Wanted to highlight just the core faculty. We have a number of very, very active people in this program. I highlight on the upper left Dan Azaguri, who is one of our bariatric surgeons here and was a fellow 5 years ago. Is also our assistant fellowship director for our specialty fellowship. I'll explain in a few minutes. Down on the lower panel on the kind of the center, James Wall is also an assistant fellowship director for our two innovation teams. I mentioned up in the top Josh Makar, who is the co-founder and is a senior advisor to the program. You have a chance to work with him and meet with him during the year. And in the upper right, Doug Raitt, who is our associate director of team learning and dynamics, which is someone you'll know very, very, very well during the time here. He works on team dynamics and works with the teams generally every week on how they interact in innovation. And you can see this is rounded out by a really, really strong faculty group who works with the fellows, including leadership and engineering, on implementation, strategy, and ultimately taking projects forward. I wanted to mention our global faculty. We have relationships with our global projects in India, Japan, as well as in the Asian Pacific and Singapore. Our staff, as you mentioned, Emily is up on the top line. She's our fellowships manager. We also have a academic project communications manager, Stacy McCutcheon, and then Cece Torres, who's our program director, along with Camille Marquez. Linda Lucian works on several of the other programs. This is really the nuts and bolts of really how biodesign runs and people you'll be working with if you're here at Biodesign. And last, probably this is one of the more important things for you. We leverage the strength of the Valley here with a number of very, very strong faculty. These are all industry leaders who work directly with the teams. On the left, Lisa Earnhardt, who is currently the CEO of one of the largest ENT companies. In the center, Beverly Huss, who's been a very prolific leader and is currently CEO of another innovative technology company. Maria Saints, another CEO. These are our three business advisors, one assigned to each team. Hanson Gifford works with all of our teams on senior innovation, meaning he is from the Foundry. He has been the CEO and leader of the Foundry for a number of years and developed a large number of technologies. And Cynthia Yock has been an expert in health economics and value, works a lot on trying to understand how to bring value into your projects. So I thought I'd lay out for you a little bit of the design approach, which is kind of ingrained into the biodesign approach. One of the most important elements is clinical immersion, and probably one of the most popular elements is the opportunity to actually go into the clinical environment and directly observe. Most people, I will tell you, their first place they go is the operating room. The access to the operating room is obviously really valuable, is trying to understand what happens in medicine. But usually after the first day or two, they realize that that's where problems are being solved. That's not where unmet problems are. And in fact, we spend most of their time actually in the clinics, in the surgical recovery areas, and in the outpatient environment, looking to see where there might be opportunity to innovate. We think an important aspect of that is what we call need characterization, where you understand these clinical problems and then ultimately move on to ideation, prototyping, and testing. This is the biodesign approach overall, which we break up into three elements: the identify, the middle, the invent, and to the right, the implement. I will tell you that the most unique aspect of the Biodesign Fellowship is the emphasis on identifying opportunities. And we do that by looking at a number of clinical problems at the same time and having those clinical opportunities compete with each other for where great opportunities for innovation are. And in fact, we're looking for opportunities first and doing diligence to a great degree before we're moving on to even think about even the simplest solutions. Obviously, an important element of invention is the ability to prototype, both soft prototypes and complex prototypes, wet lab, dry labbing. And so we use these techniques to help bring concepts forward and then ultimately screen those concepts against the great opportunities we've identified. And probably to put in perspective, it's about planning for implementation. It's about learning how to write an operating plan, understand elements of clinical strategy, R&D development, finance, as a way to think about the ability to take a project forward. This is just an example of our 2016-2017 fellows that just graduated this last week. Our red team, white team, and specialty team. And this is a combination of physicians, engineers, and operators, or business folks who served as our fellows this last year. And some of them are going on to extend for the summer. One of them actually in the middle section on the left will be here as a second-year fellow this next year. So I thought I'd run you through the timeline for the biodesign experience. Initially, we started with boot camp, which is a 4 to 5 week period of a didactic training where we actually spend the time putting you into a clinical field. The innovation fellowships, the two teams, we pick the clinical field of expertise. We team up with a clinical department here at Stanford. We've done areas such as orthopedics, GI, ENT, ophthalmology, radiology, obstetrics and gynecology, cardiology, and a number of other related fields. We never announce the area you're going into until you arrive here. It isn't important. We believe that the most important is that there's a clinical area of strength for you to work in. We also spend a lot of time on team training, and we provide you a set of core lectures on innovation, such as the opportunity to understand business structure, intellectual property, engineering methodology during that 1 month period. And then we also provide you one of the most popular elements, which is called our mini project, which is the opportunity to do kind of a kickstart project during the first 4 or 5 weeks in an area of clinical need with your team. That's really the only didactic aspect of this fellowship. This is really more like a postdoctoral fellowship where you're really off to access to the opportunities, and it's up to you to drive your team and yourself to actually find where opportunity is. We do that through clinical immersion, where you actually look for clinical problems, observe, speak to patients, speak to physicians, nurses, and try and understand where opportunities are. Then you do diligence on a disease state. You look at elements of the market. You understand the existing technologies and where stakeholders might be. You might visit the hospital to talk to some of the folks that are talking about outcome, costs, understanding reimbursement. We actually provide the opportunity to work with reimbursement and regulatory experts, IP attorneys, to understand where there might be opportunities to innovate. And then we work this down through the needs validation and selection period, where we have, which ultimately is about 200 opportunities at the starting of the year, which generally filters down to about 12 really strong, well-characterized areas. And then ultimately the transition to the brainstorming and prototyping phase, where you're actually trying to invent possible concepts that might work for those opportunities. You're not developing just one concept. The idea is to have multiple concepts. And the idea being that one of these concepts hopefully has an opportunity to match well with the need and has a path to patient care. Then we move through the phases of testing on feasibility. And last, we have the opportunity to do an externship outside the Stanford environment at a venture capital group, potentially an engineering company, a large cap, small cap, startup, or to do a research project prior to actually completing the fellowship. Again, as I mentioned, clinical immersion is really about the opportunity to observe. You'll do that both in the clinical environment, but a lot of research and a lot of discussions with patients and physicians. The biodesign kind of breakdown on clinical immersion is about structuring what we call needs. And so what we really think is the core DNA of the biodesign process is what we call needs statements, which are generally broken down into a way to in that. Which we mean is we got to identify a problem in a particular population and an outcome that you want that's not currently being met. Here's some examples of projects that came from some of the fellows just in the last few years. And you'll see to the left, an example would be a technology to repair the sinuses that the surgeons can access areas beneath the skull. This was for tumor resection. These are several different opportunities that might be in the ENT space. They might be in the general surgical space. They might be in the neurosurgery space. And this is when we were doing ENT just a couple years ago. Ultimately, the idea is to do validation and selection by filtering these projects based on a number of characteristics. Generally, how big the opportunity is and the impact, along with the ability to move the project forward into patient care. So we use what we call is the fan and flare methodology, which is we start with about 200 opportunities, some big, some small. They can actually be open opportunities, meaning they could be greenfield opportunities, very large, blue sky. They could also be very small, incremental needs, or mixed. We'll ultimately filter those down from an early 200 to 80, quickly down to about 24, and ultimately down to about 8 that you're actually working on, somewhere between 8 and 12 that you're actually starting to then brainstorm on. Again, what you're using is usually very limited data to make decisions on selection. So from the 200 to 80, it might be just top level data such as the size of the market, the economics, trying to understand the impact of patients, and maybe a clinical trial strategy and how many patients it will take to prove. Mid-level data is necessary to cut yourself down to 24, and ultimately you'll need to be brainstorming on 8 to 12 projects for concept development. And then ultimately we want you to take a couple projects forward. So some of the most important aspects that people either embrace or struggle with is the idea of market sizing and understanding that in order to actually take a technology and concept forward, you generally need a large enough market to support it. So market size, treatment landscape, and patient impact are generally the areas that you're able to use early to do some of your filtering. Market pathways can be existing technologies, as an example, can give you an idea of where there might be an opportunity to look at predicates in an area to move forward. And then physician, hospital, payer, and impact is probably one of the most difficult things to dig up, but most important. And you do this through a series of access to databases, to CMS, to digging into what the costs are for these opportunities to solve. Again, I haven't mentioned anything about solutions yet because we generally spend the first 4 months of the year not working on solutions. We're actually just on the understanding stage, meaning we're digging in and doing diligence on the opportunities without moving on to concept selection yet. Intellectual property is an important element of concept creation. However, we don't use intellectual property when we're actually looking at opportunity. Now, in the brainstorming process, we use much of what's used in the D School here with some modifications. We believe that it's important to actually well characterize the need. And we often will use the need statement and we call need specification to guide our invention process. There's just some examples. This is Ross Vanook on the right, who's with 2 of our fellows from last year, working on some brainstorming concepts within our facility here in the Clark Center, where we have some prototyping capability. We also have the product realization laboratory across the street, which is one of the largest prototyping labs in any university in the United States. So screening, again, concept screening is the process by which you have to make a decision on which concept to take forward for an opportunity. And this just gives an example of how we often use dashboards to assess feasibility, intellectual property and freedom to operate, business model strength, regulatory and reimbursement as a way that we decide on concepts. Most people would suggest that concepts that you like are the best concepts, and we try to use objective data to make those decisions using these dashboards to assess decision making. As I said, market validation, functional testing, quantification, clinical trials, commercialization are all important elements of our implementation process. And ultimately, there's the opportunity, if appropriate, to actually assemble resources behind a sustainable business, if it's appropriate, and take projects forward. And so we've had a lot of opportunity to customize. And so at the end of the year now, as we approach the end of April, we allow each fellow to choose a path that's best for them as far as the opportunity to do an externship or to customize into a different opportunity. And so these are just some of the examples of where our fellows went this last year. One of them went to Sofinova Partners in Paris. 2 others went to Longitude Capital. 2 to Stryker, 1 to J&J Innovation. Another worked in plastics and reconstructive surgery research. 1 went to a surgical company called Auris, and then another went to IDEO. I think at the end of the day, this fellowship is about learning innovation, but it's also about having a good time, trying to learn from each other, to build long-term relationships. And you'll find along this process that much of your colleagues will be the people that you're interviewing with and spending your time with. The innovation world's pretty small. And when you get down to it, you're going to find that these are the people you'll be working with at companies or in academia as you try and take technologies forward. So this is the incoming fellows for this next year who will be starting August 1st. We've already selected them. This is again a combination of physicians, scientists, engineers, and business folk who will actually make up our group for this next year. Ultimately, this is not about developing companies. This is about developing individuals. And we have an academic mission here at Stanford to train people, not necessarily to build companies. So if the right opportunity presents itself, there might be the opportunity to take a project forward to become a company. But ultimately, this is just from graduation. This is really what our product is. This is us at graduation just this last week sitting in front of the Clark Center where we're based here on the Stanford campus. So I think we'll move on and transition into some questions, and we'll get set up for that. So one of the questions is, for those Stanford Biodesign fellows who have advanced academic degrees, how many years on average of post-degree experience do they have? And then we'll walk through a few other questions about this. So there's always a question of what are the minimum requirements for training to actually this fellowship? So let me try and provide this as a perspective. This is a very competitive fellowship. Unfortunately, we have a lot more people that are qualified than spots that we have. We are looking for people who have advanced degrees. We have taken a few people during training who have undergraduate degrees with a tremendous amount of experience. When I'd say tremendous, I mean 8 to 10 years of experience. And so there's not a minimum requirement beyond an undergraduate degree. I would find that people with masters and PhDs are generally more competitive. We've had a lot more people with doctorates in medicine or in science, and those people with master degrees. That being said, generally, this is not for a program for straight out of training, meaning for someone who's just completing their master's program, a few years of working experience makes you more competitive. We want you to have the academic training, but also the real world training, because our idea is to try and supplement you with strategies to be a better innovator. And we want you to have a foundation in innovation. So is the concentration area known for 2018? And the answer is we're working on it. We are focusing. We actually have not announced the innovation area for our 2017 fellows that start August 1st. We'll announce it the day they arrive. We will accept 12 fellows into this fellowship program. We accepted 12 this year. They don't know which team they're on. They know they're 12, and they don't know what field they're working on. And we do that, and we have done this from year one. So the idea is that you're coming here because you want to learn innovation. And sometimes as an expert clinician or expert scientist, working outside your area can be very, very helpful in understanding how to be a better innovator. And so there are people that specifically say that they're only interested in a specific area. Unfortunately, we can't make a commitment to what area you're working in. So what kind of experience would be better fit for the fellowship, academic or industrial or both? And the answer you're not going to like is it depends. We'd like you to have both. We'd like you to have good, strong academic training as well as some industry experience. We think that combination is what makes an ideal combination for this fellowship. And so it might be a lot of academic experience, such as a PhD. It does not mean that you need a postdoctoral training. On the other hand, master's training with years of experience as a project manager, for instance, or a strategist, or in BD, or marketing, or engineering, is excellent. We're looking for the people that are ready to take the next step in their career development, being that they've had experience. The next question is, are teams formed organically or pre-formed upon entry to the program? And the answer is, we actually set the teams. We specifically assemble teams based on the groups of people for a number of reasons. We'd like to have balanced teams that have experience both clinically, engineering, as well as business experience. And we're also looking for some components over the last number of years we've learned, which in fact we need people that have the ability to build, lead, people who have great deep scientific thinking, and can think about strategy. And so we sit down and spend a great deal of time with our admissions committee trying to think about just not acceptance for folks, but how do we assemble teams? So we admit 12 fellows, but they are actually preset into 3 teams of 4 when you enter the program. So one of the other questions is there any protected time to participate in surgical care of patients? And the answer is no. This is a 100% clinical fellowship, research fellowship. There's no clinical time if you're a physician. So if you're here as a clinical trainee and you're doing your research time, it will just be dedicated 100%, with one exception. We have 2 innovation teams that are full-time commitment to innovation. These can be clinicians, engineers, or business folks. And we have what's called our specialty team. This is unique to the Stanford University program. This is 2 physicians here at Stanford who are specialists in their clinical field, meaning they've finished their training, who are interested in innovating in their field. We bring those 2 highly competitive individuals onto a team, and we actually join them with 2 excellent engineers and business folks to form what we call our specialty team. That team is now, and will be in its 6th year of existence. It's a great team. It's a slightly different model. And the idea being that it's focused in the 2 clinical areas of those 2 specialists. And those 2 clinical specialists may actually have some clinical responsibilities up to a half day per week. So those folks can actually spend up to a half day a week in clinical time. But our program that's based outside of Stanford is only means a 100% commitment of time dedicated to the fellowship. Is business experience limited to operational experience, was one of the questions, or would venture capital experience be included in the business bucket? Absolutely included in the business bucket. So it does not have to be operational experience, it's experience. It means working on assessing technology strategy. So it can be in a BD environment, it can be in venture capital, or it can be on the operational side. So any of those experiences are very helpful and help complement your experience here that you bring to the program. So one of the questions was, how is prior experience at a failed startup viewed? And the answer is, it's viewed very positively. Failing is part of the innovation game. And in fact, most of what you do in innovation will be a failure. And if you look at the statistics on actually likelihood of being successful, the deck to a certain extent is stacked against you. The idea is we're trying to improve those odds. So the question is not, did you fail? The question is, what have you learned from that opportunity and how have you improved yourself? We've all failed. I can tell you I've failed in innovation in a number of projects. We hope to have a project or 2 that is highly successful, and we can expect there's going to be a number of that aren't successful. That's just the way it works. So the question would be to truly learn from that experience and tell us what you've learned from experience and use that as a strength. Have you observed any common traits of successful applicants from the past? Absolutely. We're looking for people that are hungry, dedicated, and are here to actually learn how to be innovators and want to make an impact on patient care. I would tell you that one of the most predictive traits of any of the fellows we've taken is hunger. And hunger comes from within. And so the same drive that you have to actually do other aspects of your life that are important to you should have about innovation. This is not a year off. This is not a time to spend a year checking out Stanford. We're looking for people who are hungry, competitive, and want to make an impact on patient care in a way of developing technology. We have a saying here, which is, we can give you a fish or we can teach you to fish. That one fish may feed you for the day, but teaching how to fish feeds you for a lifetime. And so the idea here is to teach you how to be an innovator. What are the current fellows doing after their fellowship? It's a great question. We have a few of them that are returning to clinical training. We have one of our fellows who's staying for a 2nd year. We have several that are taking a couple of their projects forward for the summer to see if they can actually move longer. And we have a couple that are going on to jobs in industry. So I would say that in general, it's about a 50-50 mix between entrepreneurial activities and going to large companies as we kind of mix up the opportunity in the first phase to see if these projects can actually move farther. Ultimately, I'd say that probably a third of individuals take projects forward to a long plan, and about 2/3 ultimately go to another startup or to a large company. If we applied for a previous year and didn't get accepted, can we apply again to the fellowship? And the answer is absolutely. We welcome people to apply again. The question is, what have you learned from that experience? And I've done follow-up calls with a number of individuals. In fact, I did follow-up calls with a lot of individuals this year, trying to give feedback to people and how they could supplement their experience. If you've applied before, one question will come up: can I just reuse my application? The answer is, you certainly can. That certainly doesn't make you very competitive. What we're interested in is what's changed in the last year. What makes you a better candidate? And what have you learned from the experience you've had over the last year? So I would highly recommend that you submit an updated application to make you more competitive. Why would a fellow stay an additional year, and what is accomplished during this year? So we have a program where we allow fellows to stay who are in general surgery programs because they're required to do 2 years of ACGME required research. This is really a legacy program that's been here since the beginning. So if you are coming as a general surgery trainee after your 3rd year of residency, you need typically 2 years to be able to come to the fellowship. We would actually accept you potentially for 2 years. That's really the exception, with one other caveat. If you're here for a year and you're able to get funding to stay for an additional year, we don't offer that funding, then we would consider allowing you to house here and support a project. And that's really what this is. It's the opportunity to work on a project within the Stanford environment, to use the resources here to actually try and take a project farther forward, which is exactly what one of our fellows is doing for this next year. How will you evaluate the foreign applicants and their English skills? And I would say that it is important. This is an English speaking and writing program. Foreign applicants, we evaluate a number of different ways: by their written application, and we have an online video that you put together and submit. So it's an opportunity for us to speak to you. One of the things I didn't highlight is the application process, and I'll do that now. We have actually a 2-step process for our applications. Applications, I'll go through the deadlines in a few minutes, but ultimately go to the first committee, which is an alumni committee here of previous fellows, an alumni program which actually reads the applications. Each application is read by 2 alumni and scored. Those program is then passed on ultimately to the full faculty committee. The full faculty committee does the same things. These are blindly read and scored by 2 faculty members in the committee, an 8-person committee that then takes them forward and evaluates them. And ultimately, we offer between 24 and 26 invitations to come here in October to do a 2-day interview process to ultimately have us select our 12 fellows. So there's many questions about visas, benefits, and we can answer this on the frequently asked questions section of our website. So I direct you to that to answer questions, to have those questions answered as far as it relates to visas and some of the benefits we provide for people who are outside the United States. Would you advise applying for the fellowship before or after a trauma surgery fellowship? Can't really say. I think it's really up to what you're thinking. I think that some people have actually thought that doing the fellowship before their subspecialty fellowship puts in a position to actually do that fellowship and go on to a clinical position. So that there is some argument to make that decision to train for a year here before your subspecialty training in trauma, for instance. Others would like to complete trauma so they can focus on what they want to do in taking a project forward, because if they're committed to actually do the fellowship, then they'll actually not be able to work on a project if it comes out of biodesign. Do MDs go back to practice clinical medicine after the fellowship and do consulting on medical innovation, or do most find the experience as a flexion point to exit practicing clinical medicine? And I would tell you that it's actually both. We have a number of trainees that actually do their clinical training. I was an example. I went back and did my interventional cardiology fellowship and joined the faculty back in 2006 when I became the fellowship director. But there are folks that actually pivot in their career, decide that they don't want to return to a clinical residency or fellowship program, decide to actually spend part of their time or all of their time doing innovation, either in a large cap environment or as a startup. Do you have any further thoughts or suggestions for the video interview? How creative should you get, or stay closer to simply answering the questions? This is an opportunity, I think, for you to demonstrate both your hunger for the program, to articulate really why you're passionate, why this fits into your plan for your career, but also to share as much of your creativity as possible and some hard examples. So I don't think that you need to be making a super creative video. I think that you need to be spending your time really trying to articulate for us why this fellowship fits for you. As I mentioned, we really have a high number of qualified applicants. Unfortunately, we only have 12 fellowship positions. And as such, we want to understand what the best fit is for you and the timing in your career. So it's not just about getting accepted. This is about whether this is the right timing for your career as well. And so articulating that in the video, I think, is highly recommended. Do you apply? Could you apply as a DDS, as a dentist? Absolutely. I have not had a dentist in the program yet, but I'm certainly open to it. We're looking for clinical and medical professionals. We've had podiatrists apply in the past. Other types of clinicians have applied in the past, but I haven't had a dentist actually on the team, but it does not mean that we necessarily share any bias towards any particular clinical group. Do additional letters of reference help the application? And the answer is we want 3 letters of recommendation, the best 3 letters you have. We generally will pick the top 3 letters. If you send more, we may not pick the 3 best letters that you want. So I suggest that you actually get the best 3 letters you can. On the other hand, I know it's difficult to get letters of recommendation because I write a lot myself. And as a result, often it's a good idea to at least get a few extras that are out there going. You can always then decide not to send them or to hold them back and tell us which 3 you'd like to use. But generally, the committee will evaluate 3 letters of recommendation. But it's important that you have a completed application. This last year, we had over 300 people start their applications, have almost complete applications, but they were missing components. And we only take full completed applications, including letters of recommendation, video, and all the essays to the admissions committee. On average, what is the percentage of people who have been accepted from outside Stanford? And I would tell you that we have a large number of people from outside Stanford. This is not a Stanford exclusive program. In fact, this year we had a couple people from Stanford, but in general, a large majority was from outside Stanford. And in fact, this is not a US-based program only. We have a global program. So I would tell you that the year before last, we had 4 people of our 12 from outside the United States. This year, we had a couple from outside the United States as well. So we're looking for the best and brightest globally. The program seems more focused on identifying patient care rather than preventative care. Does work experience with diagnostic development fit well within the program? And the answer is absolutely. But one of the dynamics is that therapeutics have been a bit more appealing in the past. Diagnostic technologies are certainly very appealing in innovation now. If you can demonstrate a value proposition for how best that these technologies help improve care or prevent particular disease, absolutely, we're interested in exploring both sides of that equation. And expertise in diagnostics is absolutely an important part of the health technologies we're interested in developing. Have you ever had fellows that joined the middle of medical school? Yeah, I've had one in the past. That was a special circumstance. They had completed 3 of their years of medical school, but they'd also worked as an engineer for a number of years. Had some work experience and came back, and they had a year in the middle of medical school before they completed and went off and did an anesthesia residency. It's a rare combination, but we understand that in a lot of cases, everyone's path in innovation is different. So there's no one size fits all. So if this is the right time in your career, you think, for this type of a fellowship, if you have advanced training, experience, and innovation is something you're very interested in exploring, I encourage you to apply. Who are preferred more from the program, biomedical engineers or product designers? And the answer is both. We need both builders, but we also need designers. They're very important elements of the innovation team, and so we don't favor one versus the other. We need both. And so the ability to build and create, as well as the ability to think about design and think about human factors, are both important elements. Next question. Could you explain the detail about the 2-day final selection process? Absolutely. So if selected, as I mentioned, our top 24 to 26 applicants will be invited here to Stanford to interview. We post those in October, and the dates are on the website. This is where we have our entire faculty review committee and all our fellows all ready to go. You'll come in on a Wednesday evening. Sorry, on a Wednesday evening, we have a local reception that our fellows host for you, so you can ask questions about the program, get more detail. We start early on Thursday morning with an entire full day of interviews, different interviews focused on different areas of your career. You have an opportunity to interact with our alumni, interact with our current fellows, and with our faculty here at Stanford. We then have a reception on a Thursday night, which we have in downtown Palo Alto. And we bring you back on Friday, where we do a half-day interviews before we're done, and we then send you off to return home. We generally then go through about a month process of reviewing the candidates, and then ultimately our goal will be to extend offers for our teams before the end of the year, before we close for the holidays in December. How important are exam scores in the application process? For instance, applicants with greater than 5 years industry experience may not have recent scores. Should they take an academic entry exam for this program? And the answer is no. You don't have to have a standardized test score unless it was part of the development process or part of what you needed for graduate school, GREs, for instance, MCATs for medical school, board scores for your medical licensing. Any tests or exam that you've taken along with your transcripts is required for review. And you can imagine that we're looking for people who've developed a pattern of success, who've taken on different types of challenges, whether it be standardized testing or classes or work experience, letters of recommendation, and also hearing from you why this fits into your program. That being said, there's always exceptions, meaning that there's someone who didn't do well on one particular test. And we understand that. We've all had that happen in our careers. So don't think that if there's one particular thing that happened along the way that somehow that prevents you from being highly successful as an innovator or this fellowship. However, we do want to see all your records, and it provides you an opportunity to share us what you've learned from your experiences. For instance, if something hasn't gone as well as you thought it should have along the way during your essays or during your video interview. Are the opportunities to do tandem post-residency fellowships at Stanford? Oops, hold on, one second. We started a question, and I think we have to see if we can get it back here. Okay, so one of the questions is, can you split your fellowship? And the answer is no. Unfortunately, this runs 1 year. This is a team-based fellowship, so the reason we don't allow people to do any clinical activities unless you're a half-day in the specialty team is your commitment to your team. This is team-based, and you're going to be working on projects as a team. It doesn't make sense for one person to be off doing something else away from the focus of the team. So you need to run the entire August 1st through the middle of June fellowship. As I mentioned, the fellowship really is 10.5 months, and so we generally give people the July month off. That's not a paid month for the fellowship. We start compensation, and we do provide stipends for the year, run it August 1st through the middle of June. How is the interaction between mentors and innovators after the program in the case of fellowship results into a startup? And I'd say very good. In fact, our industry mentors, so Bev Huss, Maria Saints, Lisa Earnhardt, have served as chairman of the board of actually companies. And in fact, we've had a couple companies go out and be acquired, and they've had very large pivotal roles in those technologies and in those companies. They are advisors. They are here to help you. They're help development. They are donating their time. They all have full-time jobs. They often sit on other boards. And so they're here to help you and develop your career. But they may also help with projects. Can applicants submit other materials such as articles, white papers, patents they have written to support their application? Absolutely. We're happy to look at anything that you think will best represent the work that you've done. And I encourage you to submit work that you've done to help us actually in putting together an evaluation of whether this fits for you and is this the right timing for a fellowship of this type for you. If we're reapplying, do we need to update your letters of recommendation? The answer is yes, because as you can imagine, things change. And so we'd like you to update the letters of recommendation you have and just have them revised. I've revised a number of letters of recommendation in the past that I've written for folks. So it's not unusual to go back and ask someone to revise their letter for a particular fellowship or reshape the letter that they've made and revise it to send it back in. Is the scope for applicants who are experienced at the systems design level, for example, in health economics? Health economics. And the answer is yes. Health economics is a big focus for this program. Analytics is an important. Remember that we're interested in a broad base of healthcare technology. So surgical tools, implantables, and diagnostics was the old definition of med tech. That's much broader now. We're looking at mobile healthcare technologies. We're looking at IT. We're looking at a broad screen. What is this not? This is not pharma or biotech. That's how to differentiate it. Pharma and biotech are based generally on basic discovery to then find an application for that basic discovery and then take it forward into translation and ultimately patient care. We're starting with a need. As a result, the need drives the opportunity, and typically we're looking at healthcare technologies that are best applied to this need as opposed to the other way around. Do you have value, quality, and regulatory experience in applicants? Absolutely. I've had 3 reviewers from the FDA as fellows. I've had some people who've worked in reimbursement and in health economics as fellows. So absolutely, those are great areas of experience, and we think that makes you unique in your training. As an internist, is there a preference for surgical-based specialties or those with engineering background in contrast to medical-based who had less exposure to medical devices in their daily practice? We're looking for a broad base, as I mentioned. We're looking for clinicians who have experience in clinical medicine. So a practicing internist that has a lot of experience that understands healthcare and how healthcare works is a valuable asset for this team. My question would be why you're interested in healthcare technologies and an internist if it's not something that you spend time on. We show no preference necessarily. We're looking for people who are motivated in healthcare technology and how it fits into what you do every day. We don't show more preference for engineers. We need both clinicians, engineers, and business folks on every team. You emphasize the importance of experience in industry and business. What about practicing physicians not involved directly in these activities, but in clinical research and local health projects? Absolutely. As I mentioned before, there's no way that everyone can do everything. And so we know that if you spent your time in clinical training, if you spent your time on the pathway in academic training and development, you may not have had the time to actually do an externship. You may have not had the time to actually spend time on a business project, but you have done research, for instance, or maybe your undergraduate degree was in engineering, and you can use that as a way to show your ability to do both. Or your experience in problem solving in science, in your core area of science, or in business, for instance. It is possible to apply in advance. Is there any utility or possibility to applying during the mid-level years of longer residency neurosurgery for a position after graduation? There's one exception. We do have an early decision, so we'll be always offering early decision. This is an exception. We've only taken 2 people into early decision in the last 16 years. The reason why is we're committing to those people usually a 1.5 years early as opposed to a half year early. So as opposed to taking people into the 17-18 class, we'd be taking them into the 18-19 class. And so we generally like to see how teams fit together. But if you are a very, very strong applicant and you can only make a commitment if you know it 1 year in advance, you should tell us why you're applying early, why you want early decision, and why it fits for you. It shouldn't be because you want to try this year and then try next year as well. If that's the case, then we're just going to have you try next year. There needs to be a real strong basis for why you're applying to early decision. Are there specific types of engineers or scientists heavily preferred over others? For example, electrical engineers who work with systems and circuit designs versus bioengineers or molecular or cellular research. And I realize this sounds like a broken record. We want them all. It's your interest in innovation. It isn't just about us trying to actually build companies or build technology. It's about training you. We're much broader. I would say that 10 or 15 years ago, we tend to have more mechanical trainees. I think that's changed. We have a lot of computer science and a lot of electrical engineering, technical folks. We have a lot of, as I said, quality and regulatory people we've had. We have one person coming in this next year who was running in quality for one of the large caps. So we're certainly taking a much more diverse group. Do you have to apply for specific externship opportunities? I'm not sure the question, but I'll try and do the best I can. You wouldn't make a decision on an externship until you were here. We'll work with you on what externship might fit best for you and your training development, whether that be the opportunity to spend a month in venture capital, working in a venture capital group doing diligence and seeing how that process works, or whether maybe it's an opportunity to explore working in a large cap if you've been a startup, or it might be an opportunity to go to an early incubator to see how those things work during the month if you've been in a large cap before. Is MBA counted as an advanced degree by you? Absolutely. It's a master's degree. And in fact, it's an important element of someone who's got business experience. So it differentiates you. It's the skills you need to understand operational plans and finance. So absolutely believe that any master's degree, science or MBA, and particularly if that's your area of expertise, we want you to let us know, A, that you have an MBA, where you went, and how you think it's helped your career. What is the typical composition of incremental blue sky and mixed needs that are chosen in the end? Will there be further theoretical guidance in the case of a blue sky need? So I think you picked up on very quickly over asked this question that blue sky needs are more difficult. They're not as easy to take on. They take more time. On the other hand, we typically try and keep a couple of blue sky needs for every team to explore and see if they can come up with a unique solution to take forward. Some of the more interesting technologies, and in fact, one technology I can think of that was acquired this last year was really from a blue sky need. It took a lot of time to build that development technology, but we don't preference one versus the other. Another question is, projects undertaken during postgrad courses also count as experience? What kind of an industry experience is considered approximate? So projects undertaken during a course, if it was with, let's say, a industry partner, certainly are experience, but that's not the type of professional experience we're talking about. That would still be academic experience if it's in the terms of taking a class. We're looking at someone who's actually left academics and actually is working out there and getting their experience through their professional development. Are MDs allowed or expected to keep part-time clinical practice or enough exposure to keep their CMEs? No. And in fact, typically CME requirements are for 2 years with your license. So in this case, this year, you don't have to be clinically active to necessarily maintain your CME, at least in the areas that I'm aware of. And so this is a year away to spend your time, at the exception, unless you're on the specialty team, away from clinical practice. Is past experience in process innovation considered inventiveness? Absolutely. And we actually have an area that we evaluate on creativity, process development, and inventiveness. And we think that you describing that is an excellent way to show your creativity and show how you're thinking about creativity or inventiveness in that aspect of your application review. How are patients involved in the process of innovation during the course? Do they have a role after the first phase? They certainly do. Typically, it's through interviews at the beginning of understanding their clinical problems, what they're going through, but they'll often be revisited during the fellowship. And we, in fact, do a lot of surveys of patients once we come up with concepts and how those things work. And we send them out to the world through a number of different mechanisms and to evaluate whether we think the concepts are interesting, the business strategy, and whether it makes sense to take a project forward by looking back at the clinical need, doing clinical validation. And that typically would be done somewhat with patients. Is there a benefit to submitting an application before the August 17th deadline? I'll tell you that if you get your application completely done, there's no benefit to getting it done, submitted before August 17th. I would tell you that a lot of people submit their application, but their letters take a lot longer. If your letters are not received by the deadline, your application will not be evaluated. We move very quickly. It's a long process for us in August, September, and October to get to the invitations for the interview process. So the reason to apply early is to get your application in, to be able to evaluate whether it's complete. If you turn it in the last day, then you don't have the opportunity to see if it's complete. At what point in the process are references contacted? I would tell you that typically it would not be till the very end, until we're trying to make selection. And if you had some concerns about us speaking to your references, then you could share that with us during the review process. We're typically not speaking to references until after interviews. So that would be a secondary aspect of the review process after the interview process. And we understand that if you're in a current position, you might not want to share with them that you're looking at leaving the program to go to a fellowship like this, and you just need to let us know that. How important are exam scores in the application process? Someone mentioned applicants with greater than 5 years of industry experience may not have recent scores. If you have scores, if you've taken a standardized test, then you should be able to provide us scores. On the other hand, if it's not kept in the database, for instance, the GRE or MCATs, they're not available, and it's been greater than 5 years, well, certainly you should just write us an email or put it in your file that those scores were not available. What additional points are foreign applicants judged on during the application review? I think they're judged on the same basis. One of the additional things beyond the same basis, though, is the ability to speak and to write in English, and their ability to interact. So someone who's got strong English skills, who's got strong writing skills, are certainly great applications no matter where you come from in the world. So time for 2 more questions. Could you please name one or more successful startup companies or healthcare technology examples that started from the Innovation Biodesign Fellowship, if any? I can direct you to the website. The website has a list of 42 companies that have come from this fellowship over the course of the last 15 years. I will tell you that Oculeave was probably the most recent acquisition. Oculeave was started about 5 years ago and was acquired by Allergan earlier in this year. So that would be one example. But the website can give you the background on a number of companies that have come out of the program. And the last question is, what are the important things to consider in the interviews if we make it to that point? Again, I think that sharing with us your enthusiasm, your hunger for the program, and really why this fits for you. We want to understand to the best of our ability how you fit into this program and why this fellowship is a good fit for you this year at this time. So sharing with us how it fits into your master plan, meaning how do you see it fitting into your career? How do you see it fitting into the fellowship, into your fellowship period, and how you see it as a step in the development that you'll have in your career development for the next job. I think hopefully that will give us an idea of those people who are at the right time and the right people for the fellowship. So the next webinar will take place on Thursday, June 29th from 5 to 6 p.m. This is a little bit different. This one will feature 4 of our fellowship alumni who will speak a little about their experience in going through the program, and will also be available for Q&A after. So please mark your calendars for that. Registration is available on our Stanford Biodesign website. And I think that most of you who have experienced and done this in programs understand that the people to talk to about understanding a program is talk to people who've actually been fellows in the program, and this provides you that opportunity. And thank you for attending the webinar, and good luck to all of you.